Hello everyone, I'm really happy to moderate today's maybe most exciting panel talk of the day on decentralization and its importance in Web3 as a philosophy and as a technology. To help me moderate and to help me answer these very important questions in the Web3 field, I have four renowned panelists, and I'm really happy to have them. Benjamin Cohen, John Lillick, Laury, Jacot, Paul-Henry Kajfasz. And first question to you guys, could you please introduce yourselves in maybe 1 or 2 sentences so the audience gets to know you a little better?
So I'm gonna go first. Hi everyone, I'm Benjamin Cohen, the founder and CEO of Le Crypto Daily. It's a French media that resumes all the Web3 news every day in a 2-minute max email. And right now we are having a great lot of traction incoming, and we are very happy to be invited by Benoit and Hayat in this panel.
Hello everyone, nice to see you all. My name is John Lillick. I guess these days I'm mostly an investor and product advisor. I was one of the first Consensus employees. I spent 6 years there. I helped build, after that I helped build Polygon. I spent a couple years there. And before Consensus I was at a place called the Bitcoin Center in New York. And so I've been sort of living this weird blockchain reality for more than a decade now, and very happy to share some thoughts, so thank you for having me.
Thank you. Laury Jacot. I'm an engineer interested in topics since maybe 7 years about. Now I'm from a company called Meridian. The company purpose is basically to give back ownership of the data to people, and to whenever you have marketing and brings the incentive and pay people for all the actions, so the time they give, the data they give, they get the money for it. So we are the marketplace of the loyalty, and I would be very happy to explain more about it right after in the stand. Basically today that's the first time we become public and talk with people about it, so I'll be very happy to have some feedback.
Hey. Yeah, my name is Paul-Henry. I'm from Paris actually, so I'm in home turf. I'm really happy to be able to be here. I'm a core developer of Starknet. Starknet is a layer 2 scaling solution for Ethereum. And I also work with the Ethereum Foundation to build Consensus clients. A little bit, just starting. Pretty cool. Complicated. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks for attending this panel. And maybe I have a first question for you guys about Web3 philosophy. What is it? Could you give a quick definition?
Sure, okay. Well, I would say that from my perspective, it would have to go back to Occupy Wall Street. And maybe I come from a little bit more of an American perspective or North American perspective, but that was a tremendous moment in history, I guess, for my generation. You have to understand that was at the tail end of all the Iraq wars and the criminal Bush regime, with just the financial system at the point of total collapse. And then in fact, the collapse did happen. And of course, everybody was bailed out. And so that was maybe one of the first times in as far as my generation is concerned, where we saw it with our first eyes that, you know, maybe the things that we think are so serious are kind of not that serious at all, and this is all a little bit of a mirage or an illusion controlled by a very small group of people that have a tremendous amount of authority and influence. So a minority set of actors who can improperly manipulate the system. And of course, Bitcoin sort of comes out from that context, and everything else derives from Bitcoin over time. And I would say initially Bitcoin was quite curious and whimsical, very accepting. And I remember those early days. It was a community that was embracing many new ideas, particularly those related to sovereign individual, particularly to ideas and notions related to nonviolence. I remember the drug markets in particular. What I found interesting about them was it was a very nonviolent atmosphere. insofar as you wouldn't risk any kind of altercation, and because there was reputation markets and reputation systems, very likely the product you would purchase would not be like today in New York City, for example. If you try to buy some illicit narcotic, you don't know what's actually in it. And so, you know, I know that's a little bit controversial, but those were some of the things early on that started to form the foundation of like how we can re-engineer systems so that maybe there's better distribution, maybe there's more equality, maybe there's less violence. And I would say those were sort of the foundational principles. As this has all matured, obviously there's been tremendous financial implications, and maybe that's changed some of the philosophies. And I would say that these days, for me, those initial values still hold true, but also resilience, very, very important. We're also seemingly entering into a phase now where the global financial system is maybe in a precarious place. We have lots and lots of problems with identity, for example, wherein our identity lives in the big tech box. We don't necessarily have ownership and control over that. Therefore, we're limited in terms of what we can do as individuals. And so the extent to which we can continue to embrace resilience and keep pushing towards user protection, user rights, individual sovereignty, I would say those are some of the core principles. It'll just be very interesting to see whether those get obfuscated as financial interests continue to sort of be at the forefront, particularly as they get bigger and bigger. But that's kind of how I remember this stuff in those early days and sort of how it feels right now, I guess.
Yeah, I'll add something on that. Is about all the how the Web2 companies were in general in roles. They made the rule and we had to follow them. Like right now on Instagram and Facebook, like we are ambassador for them. We don't get nothing. We have to follow the rules. And the Web3 in that is giving back some power to the client, I would say. We can finally have a way to use our data and to give them or not if we are deciding what we're doing with our data, and that's something very big and very new that we are just not used to have. Like, yeah, this is something big, and I'll also add about the financial thing in Web3 is that we can finally and easily send money to whomever, whenever, wherever around the world for a very, very little fee and with no permission, with trust, and as John just said, with resilience. So yeah, that's something that I found very big and life-changing. Maybe not for us, French or European people have with a bank account and things. But I'm sure there is plenty of people in Africa, in Salvador, or everywhere that have a better way to manage their money right now than before in Web3.
Well, not much to add to this because it was quite complete, but I really like the fact that Web3 is a way for people to rethink how companies are working right now and realize that you can actually give back the ownership to people to redistribute the money where it should go, and without avoiding companies to work out. It means, for example, most of the companies that are emerging right now, they're actually applying this philosophy, and they still can make something very good out of it. And it's not only about one entity, it's about a whole ecosystem growing and improving. And technologies like blockchain are great because these are enablers that push these companies to try and to make it happen.
Yeah, I think most of the things were said, but I just want to take maybe another angle on it. So here, what we've heard from the other guys, and what's really, really interesting is like we've spoken about mostly philosophy. We've spoken about decentralization of power. We've spoken about transparency. We've spoken about sovereignty. We've spoken about just being free, it's mostly about freedom. And that's really, really, really important. And I was talking outside just about that. A really good friend of mine, Abdelhamid Bakhta, that works at Starkware, and that's a very, very smart dude. He says always that we don't only build technology, we build philosophy, and we build technology on top of that. And so that's the most important thing. And that's what we need to remember. And that's what I love as being an engineer, is that what motivates me every morning to wake up and go and work all day is because I'm here and I'm like, man, I actually have the powers to build the world that I want to see tomorrow. I actually have in my hands the ability to actually code something and maybe change the lives of the people that are in my country, on the planet. And so that's the beautiful thing. And this to me is what Web3 is. Web3 is about building a new philosophy for the future, for the next generations that we're going to have. A philosophy of freedom, of sovereignty, of transparency, of control of your own assets, etc. And so, yeah, I think it's a beautiful mission, and let's try to make that happen all together. So yeah, very cool.
Thanks very much, guys, for this first answer. And in talking about Web3 philosophy, how decentralization is important and how does it compare to old centralized model? Ben, you've talked a little bit about it. Maybe one of you could quickly define what decentralization is and how it compares to other models.
I'll take it. Take it? Yeah. Take it. Okay. So what's decentralization? For me is the way we can eliminate the intermediary people having control over our will. Like, yeah, it is, you understood what I said? Yeah, I'm going?
I did.
Yeah, okay. And we have seen for several years before everything we wanted to do with, as we say, our assets, our freedom, our everything we can say, we have to get permission on it. Like you want to take cash from the bank, okay, but are you over the limit? If you're over the limit, no mate, you cannot take it. You want to travel, is the government gave you the good visa or permission? It's all about permission. And I think having that people having this control over our permission is something very new for us. I'm not sure that everyone in the space can handle it, but we are just at the beginning of it, and I'm crazy in love with that that notion, and I'm sure in like several years we will have a lot of utilities. We don't have any idea yet.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand things, to deconstruct them, to try to go to the root of things, to be able to go higher and higher and understand more complex topics. And for me, we need to go back at how does humans interact? And basically, I would definitely recommend for everybody to read the Bitcoin white paper. It's a pretty easy research to understand, and it takes on a lot of very, very important topics of the space. And one of the things that is major, and maybe the word that comes back the most times in the Bitcoin white paper, is the word trustless. And basically why? Because human beings, we are basically what we call Gregorian animals. Gregorian means we are social animals. We need to interact with each other to be able to survive in societies. And that's why we organize societies, countries, enormous amounts of people interacting with each other. But it's this human interaction that enables us to create anything. Is because we go 1, 2, 3, 4 and we make a company together. We exchange money, and so we can like collaborate with each other. But basically, when we deconstruct what money is, or when we deconstruct what a company is or anything, it's basically trust. It's just, how can I trust you? How can you do something for me? How can I do something for you? Is basically, human interaction is basically trust. And so Here, what we're trying to build in this space is basically how can we make trustless interactions. And that's one of the characteristics of the blockchain, is that we can all interact with each other without having to know each other or without having to trust each other. Because we know that there's this system that is fully decentralized, so nobody controls it, and we all have the same power inside that. And we can just trust that the system is sane and that the system will be the guardian of our own values. And so that's what's very important, is the trustless aspect. Because the best way for me to trust you is if I don't have to trust you, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I would tend to think of it towards, more along the lines of, in order to build a more fair and equitable society, which is better positioned for long-term sustainability, you must trend towards zero marginal cost. In order to trend towards zero marginal cost, you must reduce coordination costs. The extent to which coordination historically throughout the 20th century was largely, as the Industrial Revolution grew, coordinated by a very small set of actors. Again, from the American context, a small number of corporations. I'm probably one of the more older people in the Web3 space. I'm 41 years old, and I remember when I was, 12, 13 years old, it was like the big oil companies, and then it sort of became the big banks, and then the big insurance companies, and of course, before that, it was the big tobacco companies, etc. There was a small number of actors who were able to achieve a threshold of resource aggregation in such a way that their coordination costs, i.e. very large corporates, was very low. Therefore, as a result, they could wield a tremendous amount of influence onto society. Advertising companies, newspapers, traditional media, it's funny because you look back at some of the wars the United States has been involved in historically, and you look at the way the media, Vietnam was like, total propaganda by a small number of actors who coordinated messaging because their marginal cost was very low and because they had distribution networks. And there was a catastrophe as a result. So the extent to which you can enable everybody to sort of coordinate amongst themselves at a very low cost enables, it trends towards zero marginal cost, which tends to trend towards a much more equitable society. That's sort of like one framework. And of course, along the way, this is all very messy. We have lots of shitcoins, we have lots of things that go wrong. It's not perfect. But generally speaking, I think this trend has begun, and it's very hard for it to ever stop. And then thinking about where it goes from here on out, something tells me that, we were joking, and I was saying I think AI is going to be trading trillions and trillions of dollars of meme coins. Like my AI is going to be trading against your AI to get the best Pepe price. And so, but in all seriousness, I think the extent to which you have autonomous agents proliferating across the internet, interacting with each other, I doubt they're going to want permission to enter, the PayPal box so that they can settle. And of course, they're going to want infrastructure wherein they can sort of control the data, own the data, have reliability and integrity with the data that they're interacting with in order to make decisions going forward. And I feel like, certainly, again, from an American context, it would be far better if that was something that was generally available to everybody rather than a small select number of, potentially nefarious corporations. So I think the low cost of coordination is probably the most powerful and useful attribute that's sort of emerged from all of this.
Fascinating. One question I may have for you guys, and you've already started to go towards that direction, is the importance of governance, shared governance, and maybe you can talk a little bit about what are DAOs and how they are governed in that sense. So how important is governance and decentralized governance in Web3?
Well, I can talk a little bit about the history of Ethereum and, of course, the DAO. And the DAO was, I think, a pretty spectacular event. Looking back on it, it was probably one of the best things that could have happened. And so this kind of basically speaks to the coordination cost thing I was just talking about, wherein for a very little amount of work, you can encumber funds and or potentially voting rights and or other agreements that confer governance in some fashion among a large group of people, and you can sort of like do that in a very transparent way. And so I think that's pretty obvious, and that seems to be working well in many cases. In other cases, it's not working particularly well. And so what I would like to talk about is actually the scenarios where this can sort of like go really wrong, particularly when, you know, this is a Byzantine environment, and so you're in an adversarial state all the time. The example I give, I think is a classic example, is SushiSwap. I was involved in SushiSwap from the beginning. I mean, I've been involved in so many of these projects as an investor or just trading or just, you know, experimenting and participating. SushiSwap had a governance vote to sell their entire treasury of ETH, which at the time was a significant amount of ETH, in exchange for SushiSwap tokens. Of course, that worked out terribly bad. They have effectively drained their entire treasury of everything. I mean, it was just the single worst financial decision I think any organization has ever made. I mean, not in terms of like the amount of the decision, but just like the entire process. And frankly, I think there's a very good chance it was the adversaries of SushiSwap who were largely responsible for that. And so the extent to which, just because we have a DAO and just because we all have the ability to participate in governance, does not mean we should not be vigilant, because part of what DAOs and so when you think about different voting structures, I mean, Vitalik's often talked about and advocated for quadratic voting, you know, and we have to be very, very, very careful, because if we continue to trend towards this direction, it's in some ways much easier for large stakeholders who represent, you know, a small number of actors but have a tremendous amount of stake, can actually capture a system and make things worse off for everybody else. So, you know, there are lots and lots of lessons in democracy that I think can be better applied. The Starknet people, in my opinion, are tremendous. Of course, when you think about zero-knowledge systems, the power of zero-knowledge systems, when applied properly, can fundamentally change the world in a better place. But they can also absolutely lock you into situations where you have no escape. And so, you know, it's very, very important that we think very carefully about DAOs and the way these governance systems are emerging to avoid these types of catastrophic scenarios, you know, because they can be very bad without any hope of recovery.
Yeah, I'm going to try to go on just a very quick technical standpoint, maybe. So a DAO, maybe some people don't know what it is. DAO is a decentralized autonomous organization. And basically, when you talk about a blockchain, we can deconstruct a blockchain very easily in being a distributed database. So it's just, instead of one company like YouTube, for example, having one enormous server in a data center in Iceland with thousands and thousands of computers with X amount of power, we have just very small computers all around the globe interconnecting and that have basically the same computational power, so the same power. And so that's basically a blockchain. And what can you do on a blockchain? And that's an idea of maybe you and other very smart people like Vitalik Buterin and other people that thought about how can I use this world computer, because all these computers are interconnected and basically becoming one. How can I use this computer to store some code? So basically what we can do is write what we call Solidity, which is the programming language, smart contracts. And so a smart contract is basically an app that you deploy on a blockchain. And so it lives on the blockchain, and it is exactly when you go on your computer and you double click on, I don't know, your favorite game, or when you double click on Chrome, it launches Chrome. And here it's exactly the same thing. You have the Ethereum blockchain and you deploy a smart contract on it, which is basically an app. And when you call, so you send money to this address of that smart contract, it activates the code that is written there, as if you had clicked on it. And so basically a DAO is just an assembly of a lot of smart contracts, or one very big smart contract that has some type of behavior that resembles a company. So, for example, we can have, definitely examples like Sushi Swap, or you can have an example, an idea, for example, of an insurance company, for example, where you're a farmer and you want to insure your land because you're farming, but let's say if for 5 days in a row, the temperature is over 40 degrees, then what happens is that automatically some money is sent to your wallet because we have the knowledge that your crops died because the temperature was too high for too big of an amount of time. And so you can have automatic behavior of companies where nobody controls them, but it's just technological systems that are applications that are on the blockchain. And so that's pretty futuristic, and I think in the next years a lot of software will be deployed and will become more and more useful on these blockchains, just to go on a more technical standpoint potentially.
That's a nice view, the beauty of it, what it has as potential for decentralization, and the resilience you mentioned before that we want to have. The issue is also with DAO, the complexity of it and how you want to make it and who are the one who will be actually deciding and on making it progress. That's, we've seen some amazing projects that work with DAOs, but also so many of them failed, mostly because the whole governance is very complex to put in place. Because who are these people who will be able to decide what will happen next? There are some breaches as well, there are some risks. So the trust part you mentioned before remains important because we need to know exactly to whom you put your trust in. It's not a company anymore, it's not a person anymore, but it's a group of people. And how this group of people is organized, that's what makes a huge impact, in my opinion, in the way the project can be efficient or not. Just a small...
So we've talked about Web3 philosophy, the importance of decentralization, governance, and the next question would be on the importance of tokens, tokenizations, and the economic aspects of a decentralized technology such as Web3. John, you've talked a little bit about the cost of transaction costs. Could any one of you answer the question of knowing how tokenization and the economic aspects of blockchains and Web3 play a part in decentralization?
I'll begin. As John say, the cost of decentralization, there is a cost. That cost is the only thing, this incentive that makes people agreed to secure the transaction, to secure the blockchain. I'll take the Bitcoin example. You have miners. Why are miners working? To get money. That's it and that's all. If we don't give them money, they won't either take time or work power or computing power to secure the transaction, and this makes the decentralization possible in a way where if there is no incentive for these people, we won't be decentralized. Like that's why we are very happy to give money to miners, to validators, to stakers. And that's something very important for the blockchain, is that yes, you can help the blockchain, but you will get an incentive on it. And that's one of the first spec of the blockchains, in my opinion.
So paying the fees like this, it's important to make it work. That's how the whole blockchain is working. The thing is, tokenization itself, it has an amazing potential on what you can do with it, but what matters is the use case you have behind it. Just paying fees for paying fees makes no sense in many cases. In fact, now we see a lot of growing companies that want to tokenize an asset. It could be for housing, could be for the art. That's one of the big use cases as well. So at first, it's very interesting because if you check for art, but one of the most famous cases, you allow people to actually get remunerated from what they had as a creator, for the royalties aspect, for example. You can trace how it goes, you can make sure that an asset is real, you can, well, if it's well done, of course, because in some cases you don't have guarantee. Once again, you have to do your own research to verify it all. In some of the cases, like I talked about real estate, this kind of tokenization is amazing as well because you give access to some goods that nobody had access before because we didn't have the funds. So we come back a bit to the philosophy of Web3 about being able to bring value to more people, to give access to not only a small pieces of people, but anyone else in this room could actually take part of it. Once again, what depends on it is a project behind it, and you have to be careful. Yeah, I won't push more on tokenization if you want to add something.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say the notion of seigniorage, in other words, who has the right to make money, has historically been determined by who has the monopoly on violence. And so the fact that now you sort of have an opportunity where anyone can create money creates a type of competition. Now, I believe we still live in a world where ultimately, if you want your money to be the authority, you need the monopoly on violence, which is why, for example, in America, we spend unknown amounts of money on military equipment, for example. And it may take some time before we reach a stage where the right to have authoritative money is disconnected from violence. I think this is sort of like philosophically a very good direction to go into. And so what ends up emerging is actually the right to seigniorage is available to all, and in the end, market dynamics determine which money becomes authoritative and or in demand. And so an interesting way to think about that is, well, network projects, something like Ethereum with Ether, or other networks like Starknet and others which have emerged have their own tokens. Those tokens have utility, and there's demand for those tokens because there's demand for the utility of that network. It's not because Vitalik has a bunch of stealth bombers and he can come and drop a bomb on my house that I buy ETH, right? I buy it because it is providing a utility, and that utility is something that I value. And so from that standpoint, you can imagine certainly going into the future as intelligence continues to increase, all sorts of different forms of utility that get generated as a derivative underlying new forms of money. I think that's quite interesting, and maybe that's too idealistic of a way to think about it, but that's sort of like how I've thought about tokens.
Well, everything is based on ideas and philosophies, so I think it's a good starting point, and I would go in your direction. Any other comment on the topic, guys?
Very quick comment on tokens. If anyone here has a crypto company of any sort and wants to launch a token, don't. Do not do it. Stop it. It's a bad idea. Genius people from all countries, from the US government to European government to everybody, has failed creating economical systems that are sane. Because it's infinitely complex and there's so many factors and variables to be able to create sane economical system that enables human beings to interact with each other. Just don't do it. It's not your crypto project that will do it. It's okay, but because you can make incredible things without a token. If you want to do it, be really, really, really sure of the utility and of the value that it provides. That's all.
Or launch NFT?
No.
Well, thank you for this thought-provoking comment. And you kind of anticipated my next question, that some Web2 companies that are in our audience may want to know about it are, for instance, steps to decentralization. What would be the steps for a company or an organization or an association of some sort towards decentralization?
So first, you have some Web2 companies that try to go into Web3, and they create a token, they create some NFTs, and that's not the way to do it. It's a way about how you act, the transparency you have, the way we talked about different elements of Web3, decentralizations. So what are the tools you can put in place so that you actually tend toward that direction? How can you be more resilient? How can people really trust what you do as a company? How can you distribute properly the money and make sure you don't just make your money on the back on people, but with them, you work with them, because these people, they spend time for you, they spend money for you, and you should respect that. And that's one first element. You want to react on this first? Or?
Yeah, I'll add, I'm not sure that every Web2 company needs Web3. That's something that everyone should know. You can have use case with Web3, but we have a lot of companies trying to enter Web3 because it's the new buzzword. You know, we have seen metaverse, we have seen crypto. For the eldest here, we have the ICOs and things. Where are those projects now? Like, it's almost nowhere, and we've seen thousands of billions dollars incoming into the world to not to create value, but to get the value from the people already here, and that's something, in my opinion, very wrong. But what Web2 companies can do is that they can transform their customers to they're not just customers, but they can have, like Lacoste did, they can have a real governance thing with the brand. Like, for example, Lacoste has a Web3 launch with NFTs, and what I really liked around that was that the customers that bought the NFT were able to decide the styles and the colors and the things on the new collection that were sold on the shops, and that's something that I respect way more than, okay, buy my NFT and that's it. You know, like, okay, have a governance. You can try it. Have a decentralized governance with whatever you want. Let's try token. Let's try NFT. Even he just say no, but you can try it. It's okay. Make ambassador. Create. Give back to your customers. That's something that Web3 helps. But don't just go full Web3 on nothing.
It's about utility, and one just comment very fast. This week, one very big company that created their own blockchain just got the PSAN certificate. That's Société Générale. Would you call it a Web3 company? No, they're just using amazing tech for their own reasons, but the way you treat the tech is what will make the difference. The way you approach and the use case you have. You create an NFT, you can, of course, but just think of the use case you have behind it, why you use it, why you want to create it, and what it brings to you, to the company, to people all around you.
Well, I would actually respectfully disagree. I think, and probably around the same time I was your age or a little younger, that was like, the end of the .com boom. So the beginning of Web 2, and the amount of capital that went into creating the .com boom, where the vast majority of things completely failed, I think is much, much bigger than what we've seen come into Web 3, where of course the majority of things in Web 3 fail. So one of the reasons to consider doing more decentralization and experimenting in this space is that you can fail very quickly and you can fail fairly cheaply. And I think that's a really important strategic advantage. One of the ways that you can kind of try to fail quick and cheap is thinking about removing hierarchy from your structures and sort of enabling zones of autonomy. And maybe there are instances where you can use tokens, maybe not. Certainly there's different sorts of tools you can use to coordinate, wherein you don't necessarily need a rigid top-down structure. Likewise, when individuals in your organization have a zone of autonomy and they can actually go out and interact with others who have sort of a zone of autonomy in a more flat structure, you can validate or invalidate assumptions about business models very, very quickly. There are so many examples, going back to the .com bubble with things that raised just billions, hundreds of millions and billions of dollars, which just became very silly ideas and didn't actually ever work out. And that's fine. That's totally fine. But it took years and years and years, and generally the capital would go through a small number of people. So the exposure would be limited to VCs, venture funds, hedge funds, etc. In this case, yeah, I think the ability to fail very quickly, to fail very cheaply, and to kind of experiment with new sorts of governance is probably the most valuable utility to a traditional company that might be considering, doing some new things, I guess.
Yeah. So I'll say a last thing about that. It's kind of spicy take. So if you're sensitive, maybe leave. If you have any type of company, especially tech, and you don't embrace this philosophy, because we're not talking about blockchain, we're not talking about tokens, we're not talking about NFTs, we're talking about philosophy. Philosophy of transparency, philosophy of open software, philosophy of everyone fighting for a goal and for a mission together to achieve something bigger, your company will die. I can't imagine any of your companies that will survive any of this. This is a systemic change. Everything will be changed by this, and your company will die naturally, and it's normal. Why? Because when you talk about taxis, they die to Uber. When you talk about clothing shops, they are dying to online shops. When you're talking about X and Y, all of the things are changing, and it's natural. There's an evolution in society and in the world. And here's the same thing. Why would I use your closed source companies that we don't really know what happens behind the hood? You sell my data, you use it for your own money, when I can use fully open source software, I can read all the code, I know the people, I can speak to the founder, the guys are really cool. If I need something new, like a new type of update, I can call the guy or I can ping him and ask him to make an update. Like, why would I use your company? There's no value in closed source software when you see all the incredible things that are happening in open source software. So, yeah, and it's about like, what type of wedding do you want to have? In your wedding, do you want a small macaron on the table or do you want an enormous cake? And it's exactly the same thing. It's here, if you want to be part of this enormous cake, you need to go there. Stop trying to get some money. Oh, I want to close everything. I want to make as much money as possible, as quick as possible. No, you need to have an open mind, an open vision about the future and see how can you go with this evolution of society. So open source software, I think, is the vision for the future. Yeah. Yeah, because you don't have much of a choice, You cannot be like life is about balance. It's not about being extremism in my sense is not possible. It's about how can you live with your society but evolve. We're using USDT, but because we have a need right now for USDT because there's not really a better solution. And so right now we use it, but when we won't need it anymore, we will definitely shift to something that has more sense and that has more philosophy for it.
Well, thank you guys. We've almost reached the end of this fascinating panel talk. I have, and thank you for the beautiful metaphors on French desserts. Just one word, could you answer this question in maybe 3 or 4 words? What are the future prospects for Web3? We're in 2023, and could you give us your vision of decentralization for the next 5 to 10 years? In just a few words.
Yeah, I think the future is very simple. It is Bitcoin, it is Ethereum, and it is Starknet.
I'll say that for me, the decentralization is more around the money than anything else right now. I think the biggest challenge right now is trying and having and using blockchain money, magic internet money, as we say. And yeah, we'll see what happens.
I'd say there will be a lot of testing, a lot of failing, some dropbacks, and then at some point people will understand really what they want and need to do. And potentially, hopefully, we will have some emerging companies that will make it work for the next 5 to 10 years.
Terrific. It's a beautiful future we have ahead of us for Web3 and decentralization. Thanks a lot, gentlemen, to have participated in this beautiful panel talk. We've talked about Web3 decentralization, how it's a core tenet of Web3 technology and philosophies, and really happy to close this Web3 Talent Fair panel talk with you guys. Thank you a lot for your participation. And you have one last word, Paul Henry?
Yeah, it's philosophy, guys. Yeah, go back to philosophy, go back to the roots of how human beings, we can interact with each other in the best ways possible, and try to build things not for technology, not for money, but go back to philosophy and build things on top.
Beautiful, we do agree on that. Thank you very much for this fascinating panel.
And thank you, Robin. Maybe there is some questions?
It's over, Ben.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you.